Kreedz Climbing is a Source Engine game released on Steam back in the year of 2017, developed by Obsession Soft, in which your main objective is to creed and climb. Okay, that doesn't really explain a lot, so let me elaborate. Do you remember the Gmod texture DLC known as Counter-Strike Source? Yeah, we aren't talking about that, instead we have to go back even further to the good old days of Counter-Strike 1.6. You see, long ago, inside of CS 1.6, there used to be something called custom game modes. I think the most popular was Zombie Escape. You know what? Let's see what it looks like now. What the fuck is happening? But right next to it, there was something called Kreedz Mod. Now, Kreedz had many different variants: Surf, Bhop and Climb. All of them share one common aspect. In them you are supposed to get to the end of a map while under the pressure of a timer. This fairly simple gameplay loop managed to gather a cult following, which in turn spawned its own speedrunning community. Now, fun fact, the name Kreedz comes from its creator. Kreedz was a CS 1.6 modder who basically created his genre of game modes, which is Kreedz Climbing if you didn't catch on. Okay, but how does all of this relate back to this video's subject? As you can guess, Kreedz Climbing is basically the CS 1.6 mod, or rather its CS Source iteration, turned into a standalone Source Engine game. Meaning that you don't need any Valve title to play it. All you need to do is download it from Steam Store and you're good to go. When you first launch the game, you might be overwhelmed by the number of launch options it gives you. All you really need to care about is the first option, and if you're using second monitor, the borderless window mode. One strange thing, whenever I launch this game, I always get an error saying that I don't have some DLLs installed. This error usually appears when you don't have the Visual C++ redistributable packages installed. But even when I installed it, the error kept appearing. It appears to be connected to some kind of separate config app that this game has, or you used to have. Anyway, once you just click OK, the game launches and works like you would expect. I'm not sure what's happening here, but it would be nice if it was fixed. Once you get in the game, you will be greeted by many different options. The advanced option menu is primarily to change the UI and simple visual stuff like the weapon sway and such. Then we have separate options to customize our player model and melee weapons.
Luke, I am your soul father.
And last thing I want to mention is the included MP3 player, allowing you to play music from within your game. Finally, I can listen to the true bangers while I parkour. By the way, I haven't mentioned that in my last video, but the Trenches also had an MP3 player. I don't know what you're gonna do with that information, but there you go. Now, as I said, this game revolves solely on the parkour mechanics found in Source Engine games. I'm not gonna lie here, my only real parkour achievement in these games was jumping off the train at the beginning of Blast Pit chapter in Half-Life 1. Which makes me very unqualified to be talking about this stuff. But I guess that also might make it interesting, so here you go. Before going into the deep end with a proper map, it's a pretty good idea to first play through the tutorial map. It will teach you, or rather show you, all the proper parkour mechanics that you will be facing in this game. I do, however, have a bit of a gripe with this tutorial, but I will tell you about it later. So this will be a perfect moment to let me guide you through all the mechanics that you can expect from Kreedz Climbing. I also thought it will be a fun idea to go ahead and put them on a tier list based on their learning difficulty. You got that? Okay, let's get to it. First and most important mechanic is the good old crouch jump. If you played Gold Source or Source Engine game, you probably know what it is. Half-Life 1 literally teaches it in its tutorial, but I know not many people have played that. So basically, when you jump and press the crouch button, it slightly raises the player's hitbox, allowing them to get onto slightly higher platforms than they would be able to get with a normal jump. In a strange way, you can think of it as climbing. This is an extremely easy thing to learn that you might even learn from other Source games, so it goes to the easy tier. Then comes in Surf. So basically it's an unintentional physics quirk of Source Engine games. For some reason, when you jump onto a slope and press a movement key that is the opposite direction to the slope, you kind of start to hover on it. and if you combine this with a forward momentum, you'll be able to glide across the slope. Additionally, you can change your speed with your mouse. Looking up slows you down and looking down speeds you up. So surf isn't something super difficult to learn, but it can be a bit unintuitive when it comes to jumping off of the slope. So if you first need to gain enough momentum by looking down, and at the right moment you have to look up and guide your character with your mouse. So as I said, it's a bit unintuitive, you mainly need to practice to get the timing right. So for that, surfing goes to the medium difficulty tier. Next are head blockers. These are just crouch jumps, but you have something on top of your head, making a jump difficult to make. All this mechanic is just knowing the correct moment when to do a crouch jump off of a platform. So because of that, it goes to the easy tier. After it, there is strafe. Basically, it's a type of jump that lets you jump around an obstacle to reach a platform that is behind it. Just like surf, it can be a bit unintuitive when you first try it, mainly because once you gain the basic forward momentum for a jump, you need to let go of your forward key and start steering yourself with your mouse, and press a movement key corresponding to your strafe's direction, in this case the right key. Again, it doesn't really sound that difficult when I explain it, but it is something that at first you might struggle with, as I did when I first played this game. I don't know why, but my brain just can't let go of the forward key. So for that, I think strafing goes to the medium tier. That being said, there is a more difficult variant of strafing, which is this 360-degree strafe. These are so annoying, and I still can't make them consistently. So I will be splitting strafing into two types, and the second type will go to the hard tier. Next, I want to talk about B-hopping, which I'm sure most of you heard about if you played competitive games. The thing about B-hops is that for a very long time I had misunderstood how they are actually performed in Source Engine games. Because it's not just about pressing the jump button at the correct moment, B-hops are actually more like strafe jumps. What you are meant to do is once you make a jump, you let go of the forward button, and just like a strafe, you direct yourself with your left or right key and mouse movement. But the moment you touch the first platform, you are meant to immediately jump off of it, this time heading the opposite direction of the first jump. And depending on how long is the chain of platforms, you will have to bounce between them like a ping-pong ball. I will say this, it's not as hard as you might think to actually get through the tutorial section. What's hard is to learn to do it consistently, and the longer the chain of platforms, the harder the B-hop will be. Also, one funny thing of the B-hops is that it's recommended to do these jumps with your jump binded to the mouse wheel. The reason for this is that it's way easier to basically spam the jump key, and Kreedz has set it as alternative jump button. I did have to switch it from scroll down to scroll up, as it felt more comfortable for me. Overall, I think B-hopping will go to the hard difficulty tier. While it's not that hard to do these jumps in the tutorial section, without really understanding how to do a B-hop, but once you actually play a B-hop map, that's when it starts to get difficult. The final standard mechanic, as I will call these 6, is the long jump. And all I can say is I don't get it. I just don't understand. How are you supposed to make them? I managed to make few, but it always felt like an accident. From what I understand from the tutorial commentary, oh, I should probably mention it at the beginning. In the tutorial you have these blue orbs that once you press them they will start playing audio of one of the developers explaining to you the mechanics you're currently going through. So from what I understand from his explanation, it's kind of like a strafe jump, just in straight direction. But you need to jump at a very specific moment with a very subtle mouse movement. And I'm sorry, I just can't do them. If you're gonna write a comment laughing at my skill issue, you're right. Even the developers knew that a lot of people just can't learn how to make them, so they made this tutorial section possible to beat without making an actual long jump. So they easily get to the hard difficulty tier. I would put them even higher, but that would make for too many tiers on the list. Now, what I just talked about were the 6 main mechanics of Kreedz Climbing. But we do have few more that they make us play in the tutorial. First is bungee, and it's pretty neat mechanic that is quite clunky. Basic bungee jumps from one side to the next is pretty easy, although you will need to get used to the controls as they are, say it with me, unintuitive. What's hard is the final section of the tutorial that wants you to gain lots of momentum through bungee swings. I will be honest, I couldn't make it. There were times where I almost did, so if I kept practicing I will probably be able to reach it. Oh, and you can skip this part of the tutorial, just saying. So the basic bungee I would put in the easy tier, but bungees that wants you to build up momentum to launch yourself for long distances, I will put them in the medium tier. Next are flares, which isn't something you're going to be using often. I think they are good to allow you to scout ahead and see what platform you can jump onto. They can also be used to help other players see where they have to jump. However, I haven't really played any map that requires you to shoot a flare target to progress, which is the thing that the tutorial teaches you. As for its difficulty tier, flares don't get a tier because they are too easy. And finally, there are raceways. It's just an obstacle course where you are consistently moving forward. Making jumps is a bit tricky, but it's not something that hard to understand, so it goes to the easy tier. And there we go, that's all the mechanics from the tutorial. After completing it, you will be able to play a short-lived example course that, in a way, shows a bit of an issue with this tutorial. If you look at the achievements, you will see that only 4.4% of people have finished it. And if I were to guess why, I bet it was because of the surf. What I'm trying to point out here is that majority of maps for these games don't actually utilize all these mechanics at once. A climbing map would not require you to do a long Bhop chains just to turn into a surfing challenge. Climbing maps primarily use crowd jumping, sometimes strafing, and if map is hard, long jumps. Stuff like Bhop and surf have their own category of maps, although a map called KZ Mars does use combination of both. And throughout all the maps I played, I didn't encounter any map that make you use bungees and flares that aren't specifically designed for these mechanics. What I'm trying to say is that the tutorial might be setting up wrong expectations for new players, who might end up expecting that maps will require them to know all these mechanics at once. Now throughout this video you probably noticed two things. One was the big timer on top of my screen, and this is, as you can guess, a timer. Kreedz Climbing, being a speedrunning focused game, has a built-in timer, usually enabled at the start of the course by pressing a big red button, and you stop it by pressing another button at the end of the course. You can also pause it with the F6 key. This also freezes your character movement. Depending on your time, the game will reward you with one of 4 medals. Bronze being the worst, after it is silver, then gold, and best is platinum. The thing about medals is that you can spend them in the power-up store for power-ups. These range from complete jokes like self-explosion, fun gimmicks like soccer ball, and practice tools like moon jumping. However, if you expect these to be useful in beating a course, then you will be sorely disappointed, as you can only use these while the timer isn't running. Which means that these are just toys to fuck around with more than anything else. What you can use while the timer is running, however, is the last, probably most important mechanic in Kreedz Climbing, that being the checkpoint system. So basically the player has the ability to set a checkpoint wherever he wants to by pressing the scroll wheel. You can then return to that checkpoint by pressing the enter key. You can also switch to your previous checkpoint by pressing the backspace key, useful when you create a new checkpoint by mistake. Now hold on a second, you might say. Reiisen, you titled this video the hardest Source Engine game you played, but with these checkpoints it surely isn't that hard. Even if you encounter a hard jump, all you need to do is set that checkpoint and you're good to go. Now you can just retry these however many times you want. And well, that is true. However, even with checkpoints you have to understand something. Depending on a map you choose, this game can either be a walk in the park or bane of your existence. Some maps can also be a huge assholes, by starting out really easy and then suddenly they have that one jump on which you spend most of your time. And just because you have a checkpoints, that doesn't mean these jumps get easier. You don't have to do a whole run back to them as though you were playing Dark Souls 2. There are many maps on which I just gave up on as I couldn't progress any further even with checkpoints. Now imagine if you were a truly sadistic person who loves to torture himself. You can very easily change Kreedz Climbing from a challenging game to an absolute hell by simply disabling checkpoints when starting a new game. And once you do that, you might realize that you aren't even that good at making crowd jumps. And this simple change easily puts Kreedz Climbing into the rage games category. You know rage games, you're getting over it, jumping, and bet on fucking brutal. So as you can probably guess, huge part of actual difficulty comes from the maps themselves. But there is a bit of a problem with knowing how hard a map is, mainly because of the map selection screen, which is just this basic source multiplayer map selection. At least Bhop and Surf maps are separated by their names. But this menu doesn't give me any information about the actual maps. I don't know how hard they're gonna be, I don't know how many long jumps I will have to do in them, and how long will it take me to beat them. This whole menu would need a redesign that focuses on giving the player more information about the maps. But that won't happen, as it's pretty clear that developers moved on from this game. So the best thing I can do is just to showcase few maps that I played. Now I haven't tried every map, as there is a lot of them, but I feel like I played a good variety of maps that at least showcase all things you can expect. Also, I won't be criticizing a map for wanting a long jump, for example, as it is on the player to know how to perform one, so it's hard for me to judge their level design, as most of them are meant to be difficult. And one last thing, I mainly played the main game mode of this game, that being the Kreedz Climbing. I didn't really play any of the Surf or Bhop's maps, and other game modes that this game has, as that wasn't really something I was interested in. Okay then, let's start off with the first map I want to show you, that being KZ Cliffhanger. This is a pretty good map for beginners, as it pretty much just requires crouch jumping and a bit of strafing. However, main issue is that it's pretty ugly, has a lot of low resolution textures and abstract geometry, and the lack of 3D skybox does make it look like a Mario 64 level. It also highlights a bit of an issue that I noticed in some maps, mainly at the end when you jump on a bunch of platforms in a building on top of the mountain. Some platforms blend into the walls so well that it's hard to tell where to go next. This is an issue that I noticed on few other maps, so you gotta be careful where you jump. Now, if you want something more visually appealing, then check out KZ Mausolus. It's a strange name, I know. This map is an ancient Egyptian temple that visually looks great. It also is a good map for beginners, as the main course is fairly easy, only really requiring you to do a few specifically timed jumps that I assume would be easier if I knew how to do long jumps. Next map is KZ Beginner Block. Now, from its name you could assume that this is a good map for people to start with, and for most part it is, but here comes what I was talking about earlier. There is this spot on which I just gave up. I could not make this jump, no matter how many times I tried. Now, imagine if I played this without checkpoints. Every time I failed, I would need to make these few jumps back every time. Same story with a map called KZ Beach. It looks nice, and start was pretty easy, but very quickly reached this spot, with which I had a lot of trouble. But unlike Beginner Block, I was able to make this jump, and after it the map was fairly easy, but it also had one spot with poor visibility. Next is KZ Tomb Raider, and man, I wanted to play through this one so bad. It had awesome theme and it looked really good, and it didn't seem that difficult. However, I couldn't figure out how exactly was I supposed to get onto the first platform to start the course. I think this map wanted me to do something like this, but I just couldn't do it. And it's such a waste, because I truly wanted to play this one, but I just couldn't figure it out. The last easy map I want to showcase is KZ Refinery East. I really like this map. It looks decently and there isn't any super annoying parts in this course. However, there were a few weird spots that I had trouble with. First is to figure out how to actually start the course. What you need to do is jump onto these barrels and then jump onto the fence, to walk on an invisible pixels all the way to this wall where the course properly starts. There's also this one segment where I thought the map wanted me to perform this very difficult long jump, but in reality I didn't realize that I was supposed to do a jump to the platform on my right, where I could see a platform on a pillar that I was actually meant to go on. And last was a part where the map wanted me to open a door. I know how stupid this sounds, but up until that point all the doors on this map were closed, so it caught me off guard when I actually had to open one. Now comes KZ Asteroid Field. As the name suggests, it takes place on a series of asteroids, on which there were these strange structures that we have to climb to the top of. there we would get teleported to the next asteroid. Now, I only managed to get to the second one, where I got stuck on a very difficult 360-degree strafe jump, which is a shame as I really wanted to see the rest of this map. And the last map I want to talk about is KZ Cloudwalker. This is one of the maps that I played with my friend. Oh yeah, I should have mentioned that earlier. Kreedz Climbing is actually primarily a multiplayer game, but the servers are not the liveliest. And there really isn't anything you need other players for, except maybe the tag game mode. Now if you would want to play with your friends on a private server, you will need to use something like Hamachi or Admin VPN to connect to one another. Anyway, back to the map. This one is really hard. Not only there were a few times where we had to find the correct path to progress, there's also a lot of difficult jumps, including one long jump on which we gave up on. Neither of us could make it. But hey, at least the view is nice, and in general I really vibe with this atmosphere. Man, this map would be fucked up without any checkpoints. This will be all the maps I wanted to talk about. As I said, they are not all the maps that this game has to offer, as there's just too many of them to cover. But even with this bunch, I hope it emphasizes my point that the difficulty truly relies on the map. It can be a really hard experience that makes your hands go numb, or a walk in the park. Kreedz Climbing is a unique source engine game, as it relies on parts of these games that very rarely get used, and well, there is a reason for that. Now, pretty much all games and mods do utilize stuff like crouch jumping and whatnot, but you know, I don't remember that in Half-Life 2 I had to surf to get across to a certain section. My point here is that Kreedz Climbing gameplay relies on what's basically just junk in Source Engine. In a standard 3D platformer, developers will give you many different movement options, like dashing, double jump and wall running. Then they will teach the player on how to combine these mechanics, after which it's often up to the player to know how to stretch them further, allowing them to perform all forms of different advanced moves, showing their mastery of the game mechanics. But Kreedz Climbing already relies on what's basically just stretched out movement of Half-Life, so for you to learn the basics, it wants you to basically already learn how to stretch it. If this game would have been made from the ground up, I don't think you would see its mechanics like they are in the current form. Long jumping might have been made to work like long jump module in Half-Life 1. B-hopping would have been easier to perform, surfing might be replaced by sliding or something, and maybe even crouch jumping wouldn't be a thing. But then, if you would do that, it wouldn't be Kreedz Climbing. The whole point here is to utilize this stretched out mechanic as though they were intended features. So, in a conclusion, it's a bit difficult to recommend Kreedz Climbing. If you are someone that already played a lot of it, as back when it was a Counter-Strike 1.6 and Source mod, then it is a no-brainer. This game is more of that. But if you're someone who played a lot of Source and Gold Source games and you were expecting a 3D platformer from Kreedz Climbing, then you might be a bit taken back by its reliance on many advanced movement tricks. But still, if you find an easy enough map that only really wants you to use crouch jumping and you leave checkpoints turned on, then Kreedz Climbing can be a cool and chill game to play. Or if you really hate yourself, you can make it into an insufferable experience. But you know what isn't an insufferable experience? Liking and subscribing, baby! Now, before I explode, I would like to thank you all for all the engagement that my last video has gotten. I wasn't expecting it to actually perform that well for a channel of this size, so I just wanted to thank you all. Now I'm not sure when the next video is going to come out, as I am going to need to focus a bit on personal stuff, mainly university stuff, but I'm hoping to manage to squeeze out at least one more video by the end of this month. So I guess that's it. See you soon.